Hey guys, Waterfowler41 here, and today we are installing another fun little goodie on the 2020 Ram Rebel. So last video I uploaded, we installed the Cook's exhaust system to wake up the Ram, or wake up the Hemi just a little bit, so now it's breathing a little bit easier out the back. So now we're going to focus on how it's getting that air. So we're going to look at the Vararam intake today. So the Vararam is a little bit different than your typical cold air intakes, I'll put that in quotes there. But basically, your standard cold air intake is going to look similar to the OEM intake, where it's just going to have a tube, dump it into a filter. That filter is either going to be an open element one, or it's going to be enclosed in a box. The Vararam's a little bit different. So the Vararam is a little bit more of the nostalgia look and functionality. So what this is going to do is it's going to replace your whole stock intake here. So it's going to replace from the throttle body, that whole filter box, all that stuff comes out. And then you take the Vararam intake, and this basically sits up on top of the throttle body and uses this large lip here to basically guide air up into the filter. So the filter sits like the old school muscle car, so it's going to sit up on top instead of in a box like the OEM unit did. Okay, so what do we get in the kit with the Vararam intake? So obviously you get the intake itself, you got the top, filter, all that comes pretty much assembled, wrapped up nicely. You get a new coupling, which is going to tie the intake itself into the throttle body, some pipe clamps to seal everything down. You get a new breather filter because you're going to be replacing that PCV line, so no longer will it be tapping into the actual intake. It's just going to be using this little filter and then taking from the engine bay. And then you get some hardware to attach the front lip here to the front of the Vararam. Now, I talked with the Vararam team, told them I was going to be doing this video, and they are gracious enough to send me out a couple things. So you got a couple options when you buy this. You could either get a textured black cover for the intake. You could get the, I'll call it just regular black ABS plastic, so you could paint it. So this is their paintable cover. Or, I believe my favorite at this point is the Mopar orange top. So this is similar to the black one that's paintable, except that this is painted that Mopar, that Hemi orange that we're all familiar with. So that looks awesome. It'll pop in the engine bay. I'm back and forth between that one and the texture black. I'm not really sure if I would ever go this route. I don't know if I'd paint it or anything, but just to show you, you got a few different options when you buy your intake. So like I said, you could either get the textured black, Hemi orange, or the paintable black one. So let's look at the installation. It's pretty simple. So the first thing we're going to do is undo the battery cable. Obviously, we want the fuel mapping to reset a little bit, recalibrate itself once we install the new intake. Second thing we're going to do is remove this shroud. So you could either modify this shroud post installation, or you could just leave it off. I'm going to leave it off for now until I kind of come up with a plan, because the lip of the Vararam is going to tuck down below here. Then after removing the shroud, we're going to remove the intake air temperature sensor, that PCV hose feeding into the OEM intake tube, and then basically the whole intake tube section. So I'm going to go ahead and undo the battery. I'll pop the shroud off. So the shroud's pretty easy. Just have some panel tools that basically take a flathead, open that up, and then use a panel tool to pop it up all the way. There's a couple on here. Okay, now that I have the shroud off, so it's just removing all of those plastic clips, and make sure you put them somewhere where you're going to lose them, because that's usually what happens. But like I said, you don't need that, or you can modify the shroud to fit the Vararam intake after post installation. For now, I'm just going to leave it off until I can figure out what I'm going to do with that. So the next thing we want to do is go ahead and undo the clip here on your intake air temperature sensor. We're just going to leave this tucked over here so it's out of the way. And then we're going to take this hose for our PCV, and this is going to get popped off. So I might need two hands here. But essentially there's a gray clip here, and this just pulls right off of the little nipple there. But again, I'm going to need two hands to get there. Oop, there we go. So it just pops right off. So the next thing we're going to do after that is we are going to use a 10mm socket and remove this engine cover, because we need to pull the rest of this tube off, and we need to steal a piece off of it. So let's go ahead and remove that engine cover, and then at the same time I'm also going to undo the pipe clamp on the bottom of the intake, so I could pull that off as well in a second. So let's get rocking. Okay, so I have the engine cover off. There's two 10mm bolts. There's one here, one over on the left side, and then the cover basically pops up and then you pull it out. There's two little holes in the back that the back of the cover sticks into, and then it's just bolted down there. The other thing I did is I undid this little pipe clamp or hose clamp here, as well as a hose clamp connecting the intake tube to the intake filter box. So this should easily just pop right off. And there we go. We got our throttle body there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to remove the intake air temperature sensor there, and then we're going to insert that into this plastic hose. So it's going to go right in this little cutout here for it. The other thing I'm going to do here real quick is pull the intake air box out. Okay, my suspicion was correct. So basically no tools are needed to pull this guy out. You just basically pull it up. The plugs here, plugs inside the fender well here, so one right there, one up behind it, are the only things holding this in place. So once you pop them off there, this guy is out, and then you free up all that room for activities inside your engine bay. So let's get that PCV hose removed, get the breather on there, and then start installing the Vararam intake. Okay, so after you remove the air intake box, then you're going to go ahead and remove the rest of that hose here. So I already pulled it out, but basically I want to show you, the hose connects right behind the oil fill neck there. But on my truck, I also had this little foam piece there that was around it. So after I get this little 45-degree elbow piece pulled off of here and get the breather filter back on there, I'm going to try to reinstall that foam. I don't know what really it's there for, but I'll just try to return things back to factory as much as I can here with the installation. So, like I said, now that I got the PCV hose off, we're going to borrow this little elbow here, and this is what's going to connect to our breather filter, like so, with a little pipe clamp, and then we're going to throw it right back on there. So let's do that. Okay, so I pulled off that little elbow here, attached it to the breather with the pipe clamp, or the hose clamp, and then I went ahead and reinstalled the little foam bedding around the oil fill neck, and all you gotta do next is just throw this guy on there, and that's it. So now that that's installed, we can start with installing the rest of the intake, but don't forget to do this. That could have been bad. Alright, so now that that's done, now the fun part starts. So let's start with installing or building out the rest of the Vararam intake. So before we get it into the truck itself, we're going to attach that front lip to here. There's already pre-drilled holes, and those are going to attach with some of the hardware in the kit, and then we'll get it slapped into the truck and then start fitting everything on there. Okay, I jumped the gun a little bit. So before we can go ahead and start installing the intake itself, we need to borrow one more part from the stock intake tube, and that's the air intake sensor. So in order to pop this off, you just lift it up. There's a little tab here that's locking it in there, and just twist it, and then carefully pull that guy out, and that's all it is. So when you install it back into the intake tube itself, so in the Vararam piece, you want to put it in there so that when air is passing by, it actually passes through that hoop, because that's how your truck is calibrating its fuel. So that is how you do it. So I'm going to go ahead and get this guy installed into this tube here. Looks like it's going to need some muscling, and then we could get everything started to throw back on the truck. Alright, before we get the actual Vararam intake installed in the truck itself, we need to go ahead and install this little wing here. And basically what this is, it's sort of a deflector. So when the intake is sitting in the truck, this little piece will sit right down here to pull the air up and over everything into the intake itself. So we're going to attach it, so it's going to go in from behind there, and then those little nut inserts are going to pop through the pre-drilled holes. So let's get this installed here. Alright, so I have the hose coupler that attaches the Vararam intake to the throttle body installed. I have the top pipe clamp or hose clamp loosely on there. It's just enough to hold it onto the pipe itself. That bottom one is tight. That's going to stay there. We don't need to make any more adjustments on that one. I have the intake air temperature sensor installed. So like I was saying, there's a hoop on that, and you want to make sure that the flow of air goes through that hoop. Then I attach the sensor to the harness on the back of it, and that sensor is going to be facing towards the firewall. You don't have enough wire on there to move it any other direction. Then I installed that front wing on the intake itself, and the next step is basically just to take the intake itself, loosely lay it on top of the hose clamp, and then take your hood and slowly close it. And what happens is the contact with this little weather seal here and your hood forms a seal, which will basically allow that intake to pull the air from up here where it's coming in through the grill. Okay, so I have the intake loosely sitting up on top of that hose coupler. I did need to tighten the hose clamp a little bit just to hold this. This is a relatively heavy intake, so on its own it would just sink down into the coupler. So I need to tighten it just a little bit so we could use the pressure of the hood closing to basically move everything down. So the next thing we're going to do is just take the hood, slowly lower it down, allow it to push the intake down to where it needs to go, and then tighten up the hose clamp. So since you need to tighten up that hose clamp, make sure that when you're putting it on there, the clamp itself is oriented so you have an easy access to it. So best just have it accessible through here. So you can see the little water shield thing here. So it's supposed to catch the water, and if anything does end up in here in these little holes, the water will drain and then drip out this way through the engine bay. But the intake looks awesome. I'm ecstatic about it. I'm still indecisive as to which top I'm going to go with, so either orange or black, but we'll get there in a little bit. But let me go ahead and lower the hood here and then get everything situated, and we'll go ahead and fire it up and listen to it. All right, so everything is installed and tightened down. So what I ended up doing is I pulled the intake, and I basically barely slid it into the hose coupler, and then I closed my hood and I let the hood kind of push everything down to where it needs to go. And then I went back in, made sure the front was seated down nicely on top of the radiator, and then tightened the second, so the topmost hose clamp there. Then other than that, it is done. So really the only thing holding this to your engine is that hose clamp to the throttle body connection. This just sits up on top of your radiator. But again, it's going to throw, the air is going to come into your grill, hit that wing, and for the most part, hopefully try to grab some of this and go into your intake. Looks awesome. So hopefully with this, we'll free up a couple more ponies. In the future, I'm going to plan on getting a tune here. So between a tune, exhaust, intake, and everything, then you really start to feel the benefits of a lot of these bolt-ons. But comparing this to the factory intake, a lot more surface area on this filter. So it's going to give you a little bit more intake area in general, but also this filter is oiled, so it'll allow you to clean it. So you just basically take it off, hose everything from the inside out, let it dry, and then re-oil it. K&N makes a kit, a bunch of kits out there for it. Like I said, I'm not really sure on what top I'm going to go with yet, either the orange or the textured black, but for the most part, everything looks awesome. So this is a very cool, nostalgic, kind of retro looking intake that, as far as I understand, or as far as I know, you really can't get an intake like this for any other truck. So the Ram has the benefit of that throttle body sitting straight up, and then you basically just throw the filter right up on top of it from Vararam. Okay, slight change of plan, and I think this is going to work. So I put the shroud on there just to see how much I would have to cut off. And if you were to cut it, you'd basically cut this corner and basically take the Ram logo off. I think that would be about as much as you'd want to cut. However, the way it's sitting on there right now is going to allow enough air to get up into the intake. So you want that air right there to pop up in there. So you could effectively just pop this down now and use how it sits here to basically act as its final position. I think that is fine. So I'm going to try this out and see if I have any issues with it. But it looks nice that way. These shrouds are cheap enough that, if anything ever happens, we could pick up a new one. But I think there's plenty of room up here for air to come up in there, and I think it works. So we're going to go with that for now. All right, well, there you have it, the installation of the Vararam intake on a 2020 Ram Rebel. It's working functionally perfectly fine with the shroud on there. So I have a little bit of a spacer in the back there just to pull it up a little bit. It's just a piece of a hockey stick that I cut just to pull the shroud up enough, but it's resting on here. I haven't noticed any issues. I haven't driven it for a while here, but so far so good. So took it for a quick little rip down the street. The intake sounds amazing. Seat of my Pans dyno, a little bit more giddy up and go on these, but like I said, in the future I'm planning on doing a tune with this truck. So between the intake, the exhaust, either a custom tune or a dyno tune, they'll be able to fine tune everything and really pull the ponies out of the engine. But for right now, for just a bolt-on, obviously this intake is a little bit bigger than the stock one, so you're going to get more bang for your buck from a surface area perspective with the take. But yeah, so far so good. So installation was super easy. Sound is awesome. It looks awesome. Obviously quite the nostalgia look, and noticeable improvements right off the bat. Anyway, let me know down in the comments below if you think I should keep the orange top or the black textured top on the intake. I'm leaning more towards this orange now that I see it on the truck. It definitely pops and it's got that Mopar look and feel to it. Again though, awesome intake. I'll leave the link down in the description. Definitely check out my other videos, like, comment, subscribe. But yeah, definitely let me know. Should I go with the orange or should I go with the textured black? Hit me up on the Instagram too. Thank you very much for watching, guys.